The Isle of Lewis is a difficult place to reach. Perhaps, as I discovered, this is because it is mysteriously absent from many maps. So absent, in fact, I began collecting such maps of Britain, bewildered by their sin of omission, which implied that where I lived for 7 years did not exist, and that life there was indeed a fiction. The Gallic culture is steeped in myth and mists, and I confess that I do not know if those cartographic absences were a Hebridean ruse to discourage predatory venturers from crossing the Minch, the troubled sea separating the Outer Hebrides from Sutherland, or whether the commercial hand that draws such maps, for they were all selling something, prefers to ignore what places might still excite the materialist imagination away from pizza land and PC world. Regrettably, the reassuring tidiness of my Marxist conspiracy theory offers no compass in simplifying the muddled contingencies of Scottish history. Most likely, the omission of the Outer Hebrides from newspaper charts and household advertisements stems from the prosaic fact that in every sense the Western Isles are at the periphery of British geography and on the brink of an economic culture shaped by centres a long way elsewhere. And what we see structured in their place is a centrifugal global asymmetry of centre and periphery, where the edges receive modernism's cultural spin-offs, satellite dishes, tourists, and assaulted exiles from the post-industrial city, while the centre drains the circumference and draws the economic migrant to the old capitalist heartlands, a displaced equation where the periphery is more the taker than the giver of meaning and meaningful form. It is also the place where the loss of local culture is most distinctly felt. Without the oil of money or market share, no mechanism as fragile and angular as Gaeldom fits easily into a scaled-up high-tech macroeconomic sphere, and resolving the tension between particularity and difference on the one hand, and homogeneity and universality on the other, rests largely on the thesis that we are, in the late 20th century, witnesses to and participants in a process of cultural transformation of unparalleled scope and complexity. Perhaps the most striking sociological characteristic at the end of the 20th century is local anxiety at the accelerating progress of globalization and the disintegration of the old patterns of human social relationships. Some have said the past appears to have lost its role. The old maps and charts which guided human beings singly and collectively through life no longer represent the landscape through which we move, the sea on which we sail. That was a quote. That we live in an epoch which seems unable to interrogate the faulty assumptions on which it has been constructed, those self-regulating and universal market systems. A symptomatic drama of the collapsed traditions and values is evident in identity politics. I am never sure with certainty where I stand. My knowledge is provisional. I am not sure which ground is mine. For instance, is belonging more in the mind than the blood, or more in the blood than the land? Is what you're taught, told, or most want to hold that counts? If it's in the blood, how far back must one go before I can stupidly assert, this is my birthright, this is my flag, these are my marching songs. I am this of this is mine, of him and her who came first, before you and yours, so I belong more than you do, so there. But what if I want to share my possession of roots? While the summer landscape of lochs and lowliness attracts southern suburban tourists, English, German, Dutch, French, and Australian, etc., sold on romantic myths of peat smoke, salmon and scenery, real life in the Hebrides has always been hard. The ghosts of the clearances haunt the desolate land, and though this is not the place to question the interpretive myths of romanticism, nor of the invention of traditions for the sake of tourism or nationalism, there is undoubtedly a connection between the interpretation of a history and the economic interests of those who will to possess the culture. In those frail western lands of moss-born peat bog, open to the sky, questions like these exposed arid thoughts of roots, I had never considered before I lived in Scotland. Much time there spent looking down at the ground where I stood, as if I might examine the past from the shape of my dishevelled shadow, and know from its slant who I was. I worked for 7 years as a peripatetic teacher of art, teaching art to 5 primary schools in the Isle of Lewis, the largest and most northerly of the Outer Hebrides. How I came to be there was a mixture of luck and deliberation. In Edinburgh, where I trained to teach, I looked covetously at the map of Scotland and wondered how far out I could get from the centre and survive. Shetland seemed too far. I'd heard about their oily Klondike and the grubbiness of that sudden wealth. Orkney was full of poets penned like sheep, music festivals and creative high priests of every sort. Too scenic, too colourful, I thought. No room at the inn for my probationary teacher's fits and starts. I wanted somewhere that wasn't much interested in visual art, a virgin land, Kippering sea pictures from the window, and ships all round the Cape of Wrath. Thus, like fate, or an indigestive wind, what I pickled came to pass. I crossed the Minch and disembarked one December night in a murky place where my new neighbours were belting round Stornoway's windswept streets in clapped-out Ford Cortinas fuelled with Tennant superstrength, hurling exuberant oath-edged shouts as they jumped the Hebrides' only set of traffic lights. Soon bored and scoring own goals to get my cultural bearings, I began to compose an autobiography in the high-spirited purple prose of all beginnings. Such routine arrivals signalled by gulls happens every day on islands. As Voltaire knew, the only unknown is sooner found at home than at the summit of some arduous Himalaya. Perhaps travellers should be more conscious of landfall than after, when snows come scurrying from the foothills and rivers overflow, when retrospection is prospect's half, sometimes almost more. That's a quote.